Shalom, welcome to Scripture Nuggets with Restorers of Truth. Today's Scripture Nugget is based upon the book of Jeremiah, chapter 2. Instead of using the whole chapter as it relates to the Torah portion that recently was done on last week, that was read on last week, the Torah Portion Massah, or even also as Mutah, regarding the departure and journeyings. In this particular scripture nugget, we'll be looking at the book of Jeremiah, or Jeremiah commonly known. But in Jeremiah chapter 2, the prophet reading, or the Navi reading for that particular Massah or Matot Torah portion is based upon Numbers, or Bamidbar chapter 33, verses 1 and 2, but also Jeremiah chapter 2 verses 4 through 28 and chapter 3 verse 4. But in this scripture nugget, we're going to be focusing upon chapter 2 verse 4 through 8. Chapter 2 verse 4 through 8. Now when you read this, it begins with, "Hear ye the word of Yahuwah, O house of Jacob, and all the families of the house of Yasharal." Now, when you look at this, it begins with, "Hear ye the word of Yahuwah." Anytime you see this particular phrase or statement from Yahuwah that says, "Hear ye the word," it really deals with Yahuwah either chastising the house of Jacob or chastising the house of Yasharal, and at the same time, he's getting ready to make an argument. He's getting ready to bring justification of not only who he is, but what he has done. But at the same time, if you will, chastising the house of Jacob and the house of Yasharal of their sins. Let's say it like that, of their iniquities. Look at verse 5. "Thus says Yahuwah, what iniquity have your fathers found in me, that they are gone far from me, and have walked after vanity, and are become vain? Neither said they, where is Yahuwah that brought us up out of the land of Mizraim, that led us through the wilderness, through a land of deserts and of pits, through a land of drought and of the shadow of death, through a land that no man passed through, and where no man dwelt. And I brought you into a plentiful country to eat the fruit thereof, and the tove thereof. But when you entered, ye defiled my land, and made my heritage an abomination." Verse 8. "The priest said not, where is Yahuwah? And they that hold the law knew me not. The pastors also transgressed against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal, and walked after things that do vanity, or do nothing." Now, when you look at these particular verses, again, you're talking about charges or chastisement that Yahuwah is actually bringing against the house of Jacob and the house of Yasharal. Now let's look at this in more detail. Again, whenever you see the phrase, "Hear ye the word of Yahuwah," it reflects Yahuwah is charging or chastising Yasharal and the house of Jacob of sins. Verse 5, Yahuwah is asking, what sins has he committed that would cause Yasharal to leave him? And that's justification. Because whenever you're in agreement, whenever you're in covenant, whenever you're in even marital covenant, you have to find out, what charges do you have against me that would cause you to leave me? This is what Yahuwah is saying. Yahuwah is saying, I brought you through Mizraim. I brought you through various conditions and situations, and brought you to a land that is plentiful, but yet he wants to know what sins have he committed that caused you to do that? Because then that would be justification of why Yasharal and the house of Yaakov could leave and serve other mighty ones. That's why Yahuwah gives evidence of what he has done. He always gives evidence of what he has done. Now, this particular scripture nugget is really focused on verse 8, and I want to bring out some things here in verse 8. It talks about how the priest, the pastors, and the prophets have done wrong. Now, priests, we know they handle the word of Yahuwah. They keep the congregation together. They should know the Torah. They should know everything about the Torah because they guide the people into Torah obedience. But what they have done, they have failed to handle the Torah, and they failed to function as they should as priests of Yahuwah. Now, in the King James Version, they use the term pastors, which really should be shepherds. Now, in the mentality of a Hebrew, or in the Hebraic culture, should I say, these could also be meliks, or what is commonly called kings, but these are also leaders, or what we call sub-leaders. So these are not like the pastors of modern day Christianity, because modern day Christianity, they teaches the scriptures from a Greek and Roman a mentality or a focus, and also they teach the text, if you will, through English transliteration, which causes the hearer to really miss the context and the concepts from a Hebraic standpoint of what is happening. Remember, everyone in this time is of Hebrew mindset, Hebrew culture, Hebrew language. Now, he also talks about a third group called the prophets, or the Navim. Now, the Navim, from a Hebraic perspective, they teaches people to return to Yahuwah. But instead, as we read in Jeremiah verse 8, chapter 2, verse 8, they began to prophesy as prophets of Baal. And we know Baal is a pagan mighty one. But here's something about Baal. When you are prophesying by Baal, you're prophesying by divination and soothsaying. It is masked sometimes when someone is speaking, quote unquote, what Christianity would call a prophetic word. Now let's look at something. This reminds me of what happened to Shaul in the book of Acts, or rather Massah chapter 16. It said, "It came to pass as we went to prayer, a certain damsel possessed with a spirit of divination met us, which brought her masters much gain by soothsaying." Verse 17, "The same followed Shaul and us and cried, saying, These men are servants of the Most High Yah, which show us the way of salvation. And this did she many days, but Shaul, being grieved, turned and said to the spirit, I command thee in the name of Yahushua HaMashiach, to come out of her. And he came out the same hour." Now, look at this. I have highlighted here, spirit of divination and soothsaying. They work hand in hand. So let's take a closer look at that. Now, when you're talking about soothsaying, it has the Greek 4436 as Python or Python, where we get the word Python. So this young damsel was speaking by inspiration. And I want you to remember that inspiration. but it also had a supportive spirit of foretelling. Mantioma G3132, which is divine, that is to utter, to bring a spell under the pretense of foretelling. Now notice what is happening here. If you go back and look at verse 16 and 17 of Acts 16, what this woman said was true. Shaul was there and those supporting him to show the way of salvation. Now that is true. However, just like modern day so-called prophets, they speak by inspiration. And inspiration sounds right. However, that inspiration never causes a person to seek Yahuwah. It never causes a person to return to the Torah. What it actually does is causes one to look at something that is pleasing to the ears, pleasing to life, something that is very wonderful. And that's why there's always this phrase, and some of you may be familiar with this phrase, is there a word from El-Roi? Or I love to hear this brother or this sister say certain things because they always have a word. They're looking for something inspirational. And they want you to say something that is foretelling about their life or their future that is very wonderful. So that's why Yahuwah is very, very upset at Yasharal and very, very upset at the house of Yaakov and very upset at the priest, the so-called shepherds, and the so-called prophets who prophesy in the name of Baal. Because it's captivating the people, or captivates the people and keeps them at a place to where they're not obedient to Yahuwah, and they will walk away from Yahuwah. And I want you to understand that. They will walk away from Yahuwah and Yahuwah covenant. And that is exactly what happened to Yasharal, and that is exactly what happened to the house of Yaakov. Now let's look at this scripture nugget. Inspiration and foretelling, they always go together. In modern Christianity, only speaks of smooth, great, and wonderful things to the hearer, but never causing the hearer to return to Yahuwah and his ways. When you actually look at the charges or the chastisement that Yahuwah is bringing in Yirmiyahu chapter 2, verse 4 through verse 28, you will see Yahuwah is requesting them to return to him and his ways. And as you continue to read those verses, chapter 2, verse 4 through 28, and chapter 3, verse 4, you will see that Yahuwah is even requesting the Shamayim to be as a witness. Look at what Yasharal is doing. So let us not be guilty in inspiration or foretelling, but let us return to Yahuwah and his ways. Shalom, shalom. See you next time on Scripture Nuggets with Restorers of Truth.